So I'm looking for an animal that the whole thing is showing and it is dynamic looking. I haven't quite found what I'm looking for yet. This guy's kind of cool. I kind of like him. So I'm going to copy this image, and my directions say to make a new 8x8 300 resolution document. Remember, we're doing 8x8 because that gives you a perfect square. It's easier to make a symmetrical design if you start with a square piece of paper. Okay, so I'm going to create a new Animal Kaleidoscope. And I'm going to number it number 1. And I'm going to do 8 inches by 8 inches, 300 for my resolution, pixels per inch. And go ahead and create. So I've already copied my lizard. So I'm just going to go to edit and paste, and there he is. So I'm going to Control T him to make this image bigger, just because it's easier to work with if it's not super teeny tiny. And basically what I need to do is I need to get rid of this background. So this like wood that this lizard is standing on. So I'm going to first try my quick selection tool. Okay, there's 2 ways you can do this. I'm going to show you the first way, which is selecting my animal, which is similar to what we did with the body portrait. So I'm just drawing over my lizard, and I'm getting those marching ants to go around the outer edge of his body. Remembering that if I hold Alt, I can subtract, and if I hold Shift, I can add. So I got to get his little toes, get his little arm. And I'm actually going to zoom in to make this a little bit cleaner. Okay, I'm going to zoom in, and I accidentally selected this whole inner part. So I'm going to hold Alt, and I'm just going to subtract this middle section. And then I'm going to go back, and I'm going to add any bit that was not selected. So notice how I'm going back and forth with the plus and the minus. I can use my eraser tool later on to clean this up, but I want to get this as clean as possible without using the eraser. And these little toes are important. I don't want to forget any of the toes. Because this background is a pretty similar color to the lizard, it is taking me a little bit longer, but it's not the end of the world. I can work with it. Okay, that looks pretty close. I am going to have to go in with an eraser tool and clean up these edges just a little bit. I'm just going to take a moment, and there's a strong drop shadow underneath this lizard. So I'm just going to make sure that I don't select that drop shadow, that it is just his body. Because it gets a little confusing because that shadow color is so close to his body color. There, that's a little bit better. Okay, so here's my lizard. So this is where it's a little bit different than before, because right now I have my animal selected, right? But technically what I want to do is I want to delete this background. But watch what happens if I hit the delete button. It gets rid of my lizard and not the background. Okay, so you don't want to hit delete with your lizard selected. If you go up to layer, or I'm sorry, what is it? Image? No. For some reason, my brain isn't working. Select an inverse. So what we want to do is we want to select the inverse, the opposite of what we have selected. So the opposite of what I have selected would be the background. So I'm going to go to select and inverse. The shortcut is Shift Control I. So right now I've got marching ants around everything. You can see them around the outside of my piece of paper. And they are around my animal, but it's actually selecting the background. So now if I hit delete on my keyboard, it gets rid of everything but my animal. And then I can hit Control D, which is short for deselect, or you can go to select, deselect, and I can get rid of my marching ants. Now I can move in and I can use my eraser to clean up any of these edges. Okay, so again, I use my quick selection tool to select my animal. Then I went to select inverse and I selected everything but my animal. And then on my keyboard, I just hit delete and it got rid of the background and not my animal. And then Control D to deselect. Now I can go in with a soft eraser. Okay, make sure your eraser is not 100%. Obviously, you can change the size of it. I'm going to have to use a pretty small eraser to get in between these little webbed feet here. This is what's going to make your animal stand out from others if you take the time to really clean up those edges and make it look dynamic. So sometimes it's like, oh, this is just not fun. I don't like doing this, but it's what makes your work stand out from others. So take a few minutes, clean up the edges. Then we're going to be applying the same concept that we did with the shapes kaleidoscope, just with the animal instead of the shape. So after this part, it's pretty much the same. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail of changing of the color, just because I think it makes these a little bit more interesting. I didn't really stress that so much with the shape kaleidoscope because so many of you started with an interesting colored shape, but you know, the animals are a lot of browns and tans and natural colors. So just erasing with a small, soft eraser tool. Almost done. Tail looks pretty good. All right, there he is, that little guy. So I've got him right here. A few things that I can do with him. I can Control T him. I can make him smaller or bigger. If you want to change his color before we start duplicating and rotating, you can. The easiest way to change the color of something is going to Image, Adjustments, Hue, Saturation, or you can go to Color Balance. So I'm going to go to Hue, Saturation and watch his coloring, and it changes slightly as I move these scales. You can change how much color, so you can really oversaturate him, or you can desaturate him and make him grayscale. So that might come in handy at some point. You can make him a total silhouette, a black silhouette, or a white silhouette, which we can't see on the white background. So you can play with how light or dark these animals are. Okay, I'm kind of liking the red and the green, so I'm going to keep that. And then the rest of this is the same as the shape kaleidoscope. So I'm going to take my layer 1 and I'm going to duplicate it. So I've got 2 of them. I'm going to hit Control T. I'm going to figure out where I want to put my center point. So where do I want this lizard to rotate around? Do I want to, rotate him around his nose or his toe or this like back part of his tail? I could do that. You can also, if I bring up my my grid, view, show grid, I can put this point somewhere on here so it rotates around every single time. So for me, maybe I'm going to pick this little point right here. And then every time I can move my point right here and it'll rotate this animal around this section. Or maybe I want to come like over here so that all of the little faces get rotated around. You get to choose. And then this angle number is any number that can go into 360 evenly, okay? So maybe I want to do 45. I'm going to hit enter twice, and I'm going to keep doing that until I rotate all the way around 360 degrees. So duplicate, Control T. I'm going to move my center point, and I'm going to put in my 45-degree angle and hit enter twice. I'm not going to worry about this going off the edge right now. Once I finish, I can merge these layers and I can move them so that he's more in the center. If you don't have this center point, I've noticed that I have one and some students don't. When you hit Control T, it's this little box right here in the top left-hand corner. It's next to your little transformation looking icon. You just have to make sure that you check that. When you check it, your center point shows up. That was something that I didn't realize that I had checked and a lot of students didn't. So that made this step a little bit confusing for people. So when you hit Control T, and if you don't see, like I've got my center point right here, you just have to make sure that this box is checked at the top left-hand corner. And your angle is on the top options panel. Almost done rotating. Having my grid up here makes this super easy to find the exact place that I put my center point instead of just guessing. So if you're not going to be putting your center point on a specific part of your animal, like you're just picking white space, I would bring your grid up so that you can pick that same point. Okay, so I've got all of my lizards rotated here. Next step is to merge my layer 1 with my layer 1 copy 7. So I'm just going to take this top layer and select it, which is light gray. I'm going to scroll down, hold shift, click on layer 1, and it's going to make all of my layers light gray. And if I right click on any of that light gray area, I can go to merge layers. And it's going to put all of my layers into one complete layer. That's when I can go to my move tool and I can move this. I can Control T it and I can make it smaller or bigger. Okay. Another thing, if you use your move tool, it moves things 5 pixels at a time. But if I want to nudge this right in the center, you can see I can't quite get that center dot in the middle. If I move to my arrow keys let me nudge things 1 pixel at a time. So notice how I'm nudging left to right, up to down. I'm just using my arrows on my keyboard. That's with your move tool selected. So I'm going to make sure I have Control T. And then I can hit enter to keep that. Now with my layer 1 copy 7 here, I can take this layer and I can duplicate it. So there's 2 of them. I can hit Control T. I can make these bigger and maybe I want to rotate them. Okay, so I've got them here, but they don't really look, I mean, they look kind of cool, but maybe I want to flip them to be opposite. I can go to Edit, Transform, and I can flip horizontally and see how it just flipped that lizard the opposite direction. And if I hit Control T, I can rotate that. So I can make a pretty interesting dynamic composition by just duplicating, making a little bit bigger, and flipping. Okay, so think about that. Another thing you can do is with my second layer here, I can go to Image, Adjustments, Hue, Saturation, and maybe the second layer, I'm going to change the color. Maybe I'm going to up the saturation. Like your colors don't have to be the same. You can change them. Okay, you can change the stacking order. So maybe I want the purple ones to be underneath the red ones. I can click on this layer and I can drag it underneath. Okay, if this grid is bothering me, I can go to view, show, and I can uncheck grid and it'll go away. Okay, don't forget to do something for your background. So I'm going to do a radial gradient because that's what I really like to do. You can customize your gradient. The easiest way to customize, like I'm just going to do a 2-colored one. Maybe I want to do purple and red to mimic my lizard colors. I'm just going to pick a double colored gradient. I'm going to up the opacity so you can see this better. And if I click on this bar here, okay, it brings up my gradient editor. And I can click on this little color stop and it brings up my eyedropper just naturally. So I can eyedrop the back of this lizard so I can get this kind of pinkish red color. And then I can come over here to the green and I can eyedropper this purple. Okay, so I've made my own custom gradient. Right now I'm working with the radial gradient. I'm going to bring up my grid again so that I can make sure that I'm starting right in the center. And I like to just click and drag out with my gradient and then it applies it. Now, if I don't like it, I can Control Z it. I think I'm going to just make it a little bit lighter because it was pretty dark. So I just lowered my opacity and I'm going to try it again. Okay, if you want your colors to be flipped, like maybe I want the purple to be in the middle and I want the pink to be on the outside, I can take this sample and I can just take these stops and I can just swap them. Okay, so I just changed them. And now I'm going to have the opposite effect. Okay, so now I've got purple in the middle and I've got pink on the outside. Just something to play with. Now, I am not done because this isn't really enough information to make it look like a kaleidoscope. So I'm going to continue with these shapes. Now, if I want, I could hold Shift and select both of them and merge them so that this is my new shape. So when I hit, when I duplicate, these are now connected and together. Okay, so maybe I want to do something with this. Maybe I want to make this bigger. Actually, Control T. To make something bigger proportionally, if you hold Alt, you can make things proportionally larger, which is kind of a nice skill to have while working with the kaleidoscope. And then maybe for this one, I want to go to Image Adjustments, Hue Saturation, and maybe this one I want to make a silhouette, just pure black. And I could change the opacity of it if I wanted to. Like if the black is a little bit too dark, I could lower that so that it's a little bit more interesting. So play around with these. There's not one right way to do an interesting composition, but I do want you to think about things that other people haven't done before. So kind of play around with it. Play around with the colors. Play around with the way you duplicate these. Play around with the placement and things like that. Another way to easily duplicate is with my move tool. If I hold Alt, it changes to a double arrow. So I can duplicate these quickly. And remember, if you want to get something exactly where you want it, switch to your your arrow keys on your keyboard, and it's going to make your life, a lot easier. Oh gosh. I think it kind of merged these two together. So I might just have to duplicate the old school way. And then switch to my arrow keys to nudge this into place. So because I changed the opacity, when I layer these two silhouettes on top of each other, it creates kind of a cool overlap where I get a little bit of like a dark gray or a black color. So that's kind of fun. I thought I duplicated this one. Maybe you want to make a little one for the middle. And maybe I want to change the color, image, adjustments, hue, saturation. Maybe I want to make this one white. You can layer or you can label these layers if it makes your life a little bit easier. Like I want to duplicate this white layer. So maybe I want to put this behind all of them. Just playing around with it. This is like the best part about Photoshop is that you can do all of these things. And if you don't like it, you can delete it or you can undo it. I'm changing the stacking order of my layers so that this white inside part, whoops, is underneath everything, not on top, but you get to choose where that goes. There, so to me, this looks fairly finished. You know, I've got like a pretty dynamic, interesting composition. I have lots of layers going on. I have a background filled in. It is symmetrical. So if I break this in half vertically, the left and the right are the same. If I break this in half horizontally, the top and the bottom are the same. I've used interesting color. Okay, so I've got the purple and the red with the green. I've got some gray, some black, some white. To me, this looks like a finished design. So I can go ahead and save this. Animal Kaleidoscope 1, I'm going to save this in my folder. And just like the shapes kaleidoscopes, the more you do, the better you're going to get at this. So I want you to make more than one. I would say 4 would be a good amount of them. I mean, this took me like 20 minutes to make one. Once you get the hang of it, it's not that difficult. It's really just being creative and trying to think of new animals and new dynamic designs.